In the summer of 1973, a 3-year-old girl named Grace Mitchell walked out of a county fair in Hays, Kansas, and was never seen again. Her mother turned around for less than 2 minutes. Long enough to pay for a corn dog. Long enough for everything to change. For 51 years, Grace Mitchell was a cold case. A name on a missing persons flyer that yellowed in post office windows, then disappeared entirely. A grief that never left her family, even as the years stretched into decades. And then, on a Tuesday morning in the spring of 2024, a woman in Albuquerque, New Mexico, got a phone call that rewrote everything she thought she knew about herself. Grace Mitchell was alive. She had been alive the entire time. Dorothy and Raymond Mitchell were a young couple in the summer of 1973. Raymond worked for a grain elevator just outside Hays. Dorothy stayed home with their 3 children, Tommy, who was 7, Renee, who was 5, and Grace, the youngest, who had just turned 3 in April. By all accounts, Grace was a bright, stubborn little girl with a gap-toothed smile and a habit of wandering toward anything that caught her eye. Her mother later said she was the kind of child who made you nervous in a crowd. Not because she was difficult, because she was curious about everything. The Ellis County Fair was an annual fixture in the region. The Mitchells went every year. It was a Saturday, August 11th, 1973. The fairgrounds were packed. Dorothy was holding Grace's hand at a food stand when she turned briefly to pay. The hand she reached back for was empty. She screamed her daughter's name. Fair workers were alerted within minutes. The exits were watched. A search was organized within the hour. Law enforcement arrived. Interviews were conducted. The grounds were combed section by section. Nothing. Not a single witness who could say with certainty they had seen a small blonde girl leave with anyone. A few people thought they might have seen something. Might have. Those leads went nowhere. Grace Mitchell simply vanished into a summer afternoon. The FBI was brought in within days. The case made national wire services. A brief flicker of attention before the next story pushed it aside. Ellis County investigators pursued every lead that came in over the following months. A reported sighting in Oklahoma City, another in Colorado Springs, an anonymous letter that turned out to be a hoax. Raymond Mitchell drove to 3 separate states on his own time and his own money, chasing tips that dissolved on contact. By 1975, the active investigation had slowed to a crawl. By 1978, Grace's file had been reclassified as inactive. Dorothy Mitchell would not accept that word, inactive, for the rest of her life. She continued to mail updated flyers, continued to call the sheriff's department every year on Grace's birthday, continued to hold on to the possibility that her daughter was somewhere in the world, alive. Raymond died of a heart attack in 1991, without ever knowing what had happened. Dorothy died in 2019, still not knowing. She never stopped. That matters. What had actually happened on August 11th, 1973, would not come fully into focus for more than 5 decades. But the shape of it, as investigators would later piece together, was this. A woman named Loretta Voss had been walking through the fairgrounds that afternoon. She was 43 years old, unmarried, and had spent much of her adult life battling what her neighbors in later years would describe as an unspecified mental illness, the kind that went unnamed and untreated in rural America in the early 1970s. She had suffered a stillbirth 2 years earlier. She had told people in her community that she had a daughter. She did not. Loretta saw Grace Mitchell at the edge of the food stand area. Grace, true to her nature, had wandered a few steps from her mother and was staring at a spinning carnival light. Loretta took her by the hand and walked her to the parking lot. No one stopped them. No one who saw them later recalled anything alarming about the image. A woman and a small child walking together, as thousands of women and small children were doing that afternoon. Loretta drove Grace 430 miles to Albuquerque, New Mexico, where she had a sister. Within weeks, she had enrolled the child in a local church nursery program under a new name, Carol Lynn Voss. She told people the girl was her niece, newly in her care. The sister, Patrice, asked few questions. She later told investigators she had been afraid of Loretta for most of her life and had learned not to push. Over time, Loretta's story shifted and consolidated. Carol was her daughter. That was simply who she was. Grace Mitchell grew up as Carol Voss in Albuquerque. She went to public schools, graduated high school in 1988, attended a community college, worked for years as a dental office administrator. She married in her early 30s, took her husband's name, Herrera, had 2 children of her own. Loretta remained in her life until Loretta's death in 2017, at which point Carol was 47 years old and had spent 44 years believing she was someone she was not. There were moments, over the decades, when Carol felt something was off. She had no birth certificate that could be fully verified. Loretta had always provided a story, always produced some document or another, always smoothed things over. Carol had accepted these explanations because what else do you do? Loretta was her mother. That was what she knew. The thread that unraveled everything began not with investigators, but with a home Dina kit. In 2022, Carol Herrera's teenage daughter, wanting to know more about her family heritage, purchased a consumer genealogy DNA test. She submitted her sample, received her results, and began exploring the family connections the database suggested. The connections on her father's side were clear and traceable. The connections on her mother's side were strange. There were no Voss relatives anywhere in the system. There were no relatives at all that matched the family tree she had been given. She mentioned this to her mother. Carol, then 52, uploaded her own DNA to the same platform. The results were the same, a blank wall where her maternal family should have been. Over the following months, Carol began quietly, cautiously, to dig. She hired a genealogical researcher. She submitted her DNA to a second platform. She started asking questions she had never let herself ask while Loretta was alive. In early 2023, the genealogical researcher made contact with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. A flag was raised. Carol's DNA profile was cross-referenced against unresolved cases in the NAMOS database. It matched a family reference sample that had been submitted years earlier by Tommy Mitchell, Grace's older brother, who was now in his late 50s and living in Wichita. The Kansas Bureau of Investigation was notified. A forensic genealogist was brought in to confirm the connection. Over a period of months, additional DNA testing was conducted. The match was definitive. Carol Lynn Herrera was Grace Ann Mitchell. On April 3, 2024, investigators made the call to Albuquerque. Carol Herrera has spoken in limited terms publicly about what that phone call felt like. She has described it as the moment her life split into 2 separate timelines, the one she had lived and the one that had been taken from her before she was old enough to understand what was happening. She said she did not cry immediately. She sat very still for a long time. Her brother Tommy drove to Albuquerque 2 weeks later. Their reunion, which was kept private at the family's request, was described by those close to the family as overwhelmingly emotional. Tommy had been 7 years old the day Grace disappeared. He had spent 51 years carrying the particular weight of being the sibling who was there and could not explain what happened. Renee Mitchell, Grace's older sister, had died in 2009. She never knew. Loretta Voss who had committed the act that set all of this in motion, was herself beyond the reach of any criminal prosecution. She had died in Albuquerque in 2017. Her sister Patrice, still living, cooperated fully with investigators and confirmed the account that had been reconstructed from records, interviews, and Carol's own fragmented memories. No other living person has been charged in connection with the case, as investigators concluded Patrice had not been a knowing participant in the abduction. The Ellis County Sheriff's Office formally closed the Grace Mitchell missing persons case on June 17, 2024. It had been open for 50 years, 10 months, and 6 days. What do you do with a story like this? How do you hold all of it at once? The relief, the grief, the 51 years that cannot be returned, the 2 children Carol raised who now understand their own history differently, the brother who got his sister back at an age when neither of them is young anymore. There is no clean resolution here. Grace Mitchell was found. Carol Herrera did not disappear. Both of those things are true, and they exist in tension with each other in ways that will take years to understand. But there is something in this story worth sitting with. Dorothy Mitchell died in 2019, not knowing. She called the sheriff's department every year on her daughter's birthday. She mailed flyers that no one answered. She never used the word inactive because she refused to believe it applied to her child. Her son submitted a DNA sample to a database because he had never stopped either. A teenage girl in Albuquerque bought a genealogy kit because she was curious about her family. Grace Mitchell came home because no one in her family ever fully accepted that she was gone. She was 3 years old when she disappeared. She is 54 years old now. She is someone's mother. She is Tommy Mitchell's sister. She is Dorothy and Raymond Mitchell's daughter, even though they are not here to know it. Now you know her name. The real one. Both of them.